Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pound for Pound podcast here on the Fight Game Media Network. I'm your co-host Carlos Toro, and joining me as always is Robert Silva. And boy, Robert, do we have a show today. There were maybe in the last 72 hours, there were maybe about 4 or 5 different things that could have easily led off this show, but the last 10 hours, at least as of this recording, the last 10 hours has sort of decided what's going to open the show. But before we do, Robert, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing, big man?
Doing pretty good. Can't really complain much. Had a nice weekend and, a nice relaxing weekend. Really doing a ton of studying because basically for a job, and I know no one really cares, but literally I spent the whole weekend just prepping to be a notary public here in Ohio just so I could do another job, and I passed. So, always that nice little thing. Had to kind of sacrifice live boxing viewing, but I did manage to catch up before the show. So we definitely do have a lot to talk about, and the most pressing matter is the update regarding Errol Spence Jr. and his fight against Manny Pacquiao no longer happening on August 21st. Errol Spence Jr., it was announced earlier today, or on August 10, that he suffered an eye injury and will not fight Manny Pacquiao on August 21st in Las Vegas. That fight was supposed to headline a Fox Sports PBC pay-per-view at the T-Mobile Arena, and that was such a big fight that we were all looking forward to, and it's a retinal tear in his left eye. And first of all, speedy recovery, full recovery. We wish Errol Spence a good recovery. Hopefully he's back in the ring, hopefully with no lasting damage. But before we kind of get into the Spence thing, so what happened was Spence suffered the injury, and now in his place is Yordenis Ugas, who's going to be fighting Manny Pacquiao in the new main event for the WBA welterweight title. So there's still going to be a welterweight title on the line. It just won't be Spence's IBF and WBC welterweight title. So that's the new main event. And now the current card, assuming there's no other changes of a fight being moved off pay-per-view or anything, right now the pay-per-view card looks like this. Yordenis Ugas versus Manny Pacquiao, Robert Guerrero versus Victor Ortiz, and then you have, I'm blanking out right now on the third fight. We're recording this at almost midnight, but yeah, it's right now. I think that's the Robert Guerrero Victor Ortiz fight is the main event, right? Mark Massio versus Julio Ceja. That was supposed to open the show. So those are the 3 fights that are currently on the show. There was no undercard or non-pay-per-view undercard announced prior to this. We would have, right around this time, we probably would have already known if there was going to be a televised prelims, and we haven't really gotten anything, and we're 11 days from the fight, and I'm sure there's an undercard already set. They just haven't announced it, but what's going to be the 4th fight on the undercard, who knows? But first of all, Robert, your thoughts on Spence's injury, your thoughts on the Manny Pacquiao Yordenis Ugas fight now being the new main event. Personally, for me, I like this fight. I think it's very interesting. I think Yordenis Ugas does present a lot of problems. He definitely has the size advantage. Ugas a very tricky and slick boxer who gives everyone in the division a lot of problems. He'll beat everyone except maybe 3 or 4 welterweights right now. That's how good Yordenis Ugas is. So, Robert, your thoughts?
I think this is the end of the line for Errol Spence. I think he should retire. My gut tells me this injury is a result of that horrific car accident he suffered. Oh, damn, almost 2 years ago, right? September of 2019. So I think
it was right around October.
Oh, October 2000. It was after the Porter fight. So right, October. So almost 2 years. I think it's over for Spence. I believe that injury. My gut. We have no verification, but my gut tells me that was a remnant from that injury. It sure didn't happen against Danny Garcia, because Garcia didn't land anything significant in that fight. I think that's the end of the line for Errol Spence. Manny versus Ugas. This is not going to be an easy fight for Manny. Ugas is a tremendous counterpuncher. He's your typical slick Cuban boxer with tremendous defense, excellent counterpuncher. He's a lot like Erislandy Lara was in his prime, Guillermo Rigondeaux, Luis Ortiz. He's a tough out. And Manny is 42, going on 43. And guys like Ugas have traditionally given Manny Pacquiao problems. If you look at Manny, his toughest fights were against counterpunchers and/or slick boxers. Remember, Eric Morales beat him one time boxing. Juan Manuel Marquez knocked him out and had 3 firefights with Manny where Manny could never solve the puzzle. Floyd boxed his ears off. So you see the pattern. Ugas is in his prime. Ugas is tough. This is going to be it'll be a more competitive fight because I thought Spence was going to dominate. This is not going to be an easy fight for either guy. I see a split decision either way in a very tough fight. And remember, you said 3 or 4 welterweights. You're right. I think the only welterweights that could beat Ugas right now, because I'm taking Errol Spence out the equation, is Bud Crawford, Manny Pacquiao, and Boots Ennis, because he was robbed against Porter.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say Ugas was robbed against Porter, but it was a very close fight. I didn't think either...
that was a knockdown in the 12th.
Yeah, no, that I agree.
And that would have had him win the fight. That was ridiculous.
Yes, I agree. Ugas should have gotten a knockdown, and that would have been the difference maker against Sean Porter. But the thing about this fight, I think this fight, the one thing, and I think a lot of people look at Yordenis Ugas and they see the size advantage and they look at him and they think, that's something Manny had to deal with. But Manny has faced big opposition in the past and has done pretty well against certain fighters. Remember, he fought Antonio Margarito. He dominated him. Margarito looked like a giant.
Yeah, but Margarito is a slugger who was picture perfect for him. Manny doesn't lose to sluggers. All right.
No.
Manny loses to boxers. And it doesn't matter the size of Ugas. He could be Manny's height. The man's a tremendous boxer. Those are the guys that give Manny problems. The real big dudes that Manny is beating up, Oscar was way past his prime. Miguel Cotto had no business fighting Manny after taking the severe beating at the hands of Margarito. Those were guys that were much bigger than Manny. Lucas Matisse was done. Keith Thurman was coming off a long layoff, and that wasn't an easy fight for Manny. So, yes, it doesn't matter the size. It's the style. It's style.
Yeah, it's stylistically, it's a tougher fight for Pacquiao. Physically, I don't think it really matters all that much. The interesting thing is, how are both of these guys really preparing now? Because you got 11 fights for a very tricky fight, and Ugas was preparing to face Fabian Maidana, and Pacquiao was supposed to face Errol Spence Jr. Now their entire strategy goes out the window because Maidana is a different fighter than Pacquiao, and Ugas is a different fighter from Spence. So it really is hard. I mean, on paper with a full camp, I think I would give the edge to Manny Pacquiao, but in this case, it's very hard to really kind of pinpoint who has the edge in this scenario. Now, I think about 14 hours as of this recording, there's going to be a virtual press conference. Hopefully I'll be able to be in it, and we'll get a better read on Manny and Yordenis as far as their preparations for this fight. I mean, I would imagine that it really forced a lot of change. I mean, Manny was preparing for maybe a big slug fight, a slugfest, a brawl against Errol Spence Jr., probably preparing for a guy that's going to take it to the inside on Manny. But with Ugas, it's a completely different story, because that's not exactly what Ugas is as a fighter. He'll fight and he'll trade every so often, but his bread and butter is being the slick boxer that he is and moving around the ring and making things difficult with his size and his length. It's a very different fight that Manny has to prepare for. I would argue.
When was the last time you had a Cuban fighter that was a power punching slugger? They all come out of that Cuban amateur system where they rely on boxing, defense, counterpunching. I can't think of one. When was the last time you had a Cuban slugger?
I mean, would you consider Luis Ortiz?
No, he's a slick boxer.
No.
He's a counterpuncher. No.
That's fair.
No.
That's a very good question because again, there's the Cuban style of boxing.
He's the closest, but still, he's a boxer first. He reminds me a lot of legendary light heavyweight champion Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, where he could slug, but he'd rather sit back and counterpunch. That's Ortiz. Juan Carlos Gomez. It's just the way they're trained in Cuba. Yeah.
Yeah, Ugas is kind of like a modern day anomaly as far as the Cuban style of boxing, because Ugas is not your prototypical Cuban boxer in 2021. He's not a Guillermo Rigondeaux. He's not a Erizlandi Lara. He's not a Luis Ortiz
or Joel Casamayor.
No. So it is an interesting fight to sort of look at, but let's be honest. Look, as much as I am intrigued in this fight, and I think boxing purists and boxing hardcores are actually really excited about this fight because of how different the clash of styles is between Manny and Yordenis. But for the casual fans, for those who are not real, deep boxing fans who will maybe tune in for a big fight, when you look at this undercard, what we only have is 3 fights, no other title fights other than the main event, and then you got Ugas in. You have to admit, this pay-per-view card is not good.
It's a 1-fight card. It was a 1-fight card before Errol got hurt. It's a 1-fight card.
It was, and now you're getting a guy who's been untested as a pay-per-view headliner, and this fight will.
It's all going to be on Manny's popularity.
This fight will absolutely tell us how much of a draw Manny Pacquiao is in 2021. Yeah, no other fighter on this card is going to draw a single pay-per-view.
He's drawing the entire pay-per-view. Whoever buys the fight because they want to see Manny. It's not even the boxing purists. Look at the damn undercard. It's trash.
Yeah, look, Mark Massiello versus Julio Ceja is an interesting fight, and I like that fight, but that's not going to get me to shell out $70. And Robert Guerrero and Victor Ortiz is a garbage fight. Yep. It'll be fun in a garbagey kind of way. That's not going to get me to pay $70.
That's the Mexican American version of Kell Brook versus Amir Khan. 2 guys on the verge of getting dementia.
I mean, yeah, and you know what? And speaking of Kell Brook, we going back to Spence and his future and with the eye injury, because here's the thing, it's a torn retina, and Robert, you and I have seen boxers go through eye injuries, in the past. And hell, Kell Brook suffered a broken orbital bone at the hands of Errol Spence Jr. Now, granted, that was the second broken orbital bone he suffered. The first one was against Gennady Golovkin, but after that first one, Brook was never the same. He was never the same after he suffered that broken orbital bone against Golovkin. He sure as hell was. There was no chance he was going to get even close to what he was after Spence broke his second orbital bone. And we've seen fighters time and time again suffer these eye injuries, and it's almost impossible for someone to suffer an injury like that.
A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article on Jeff Chandler, who's still to this day the greatest bantamweight I've ever seen. He lost his world title to Ricardo Sandoval in April of '84, suffered the same injury Errol Spence has, and he never fought again. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, this was 2 years after Sugar Ray Leonard this was a year after Sugar Ray Leonard had his detached retina, and he came back that same year that Jeff Chandler retired. So we've seen both cases. One suffered to the point where he could never fight again, and one was able to return. But rarely do you see a fighter come back successfully from a retina tear, a detached retina, whatever you want to call it. That's why I'm saying it's the end of the line for Errol Spence. And how was he able to fight Danny Garcia? Because I'm guessing that he had that back then. This isn't something that just happened. I think they were taking a physical,
so-
and it popped up that he had a tear in his retina.
Yeah, so the point I was saying is that it's hard for a fighter to suffer that kind of injury,
Right,
and come back as they were, as dominant as they were in the past. And the interest, and here's the thing, like, Spence was coming off the fight against Danny Garcia where he looked great. From a boxing perspective, this was maybe his best performance, not the most impressive looking performance, but it was the best performance he had, considering that that was his first fight after a car accident that, let's be honest, when you look at the footage, you wonder how the hell is he still alive?
I still don't know how he was ejected from his car, fell face first onto the concrete, and survived. That A, he didn't die, and B, he wasn't in an intensive coma.
Yeah, and, look, I give credit to Spence. He tweeted out, he survived worse, and he's right. But here's the thing. A torn retina is something that's so specifically damaging, especially to combat sports athletes, especially to boxers. And when you're looking at a division that is not exactly a feather-fisted division, Pacquiao still has power. Ugas can punch, even though, sometimes he may not show that he has power. Trust me, he has power. Sean Porter gave Errol Spence a lot of trouble and a lot of problems on the physical side, and Crawford is about as dangerous as you can get in the welterweight division. I mean, if he comes back, don't
forget about Boots Ennis, who in a year from now, Boots Ennis will be the most complete welterweight on the planet. So, and let's say Errol goes up to junior middleweight, super welterweight. That's even more dangerous.
Yeah. And, I wish Errol a speedy recovery, but, I mean, look, we don't know when he's going to come back. It could be 4 months from now. It could be 8 months from now. It could be a year from now. We have no idea.
We'll be talking about commissions and sanctioning bodies soon, but if any commission sanctions a fight of his in 4 months from now, they should be locked up. You can't really tear your retina and fight in 4 months. No, that's impossible.
No. Like, maybe the fastest recovery that we were able to see, well, not even a fast, no, this wasn't even a fast recovery, but, I mean, when you look at, someone like Naoya Inoue, who suffered I believe it was a broken orbital bone, he had surgery on his eye, he came back and he looked pretty good against Jason Maloney, but here's the thing, Inoue had, 18 months, or something like that to prepare, or to recover, so...
Yeah. He didn't come back right away, no, and, he was scheduled to fight. He was scheduled to fight that following April, but even then, that was that's the absolute best case scenario, and we have no idea. And you know what? The pandemic might have saved his career, because that's only 5 months after he suffered that injury, and I thought at the time it was too soon.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going to be next for Errol Spence Jr. I don't think we're going to be hearing from him as far as
what he needs to concentrate. What he needs to concentrate is to recover, to get his eyesight back in place, and then take it from there and think long and hard about fighting again. And I hope his advisors, I hope Al Heyman, Floyd Mayweather Jr., I hope they sit him down and say, look, you've made a lot of money in the sport, and Errol Spence has the potential to be a tremendous color commentator. He's a well-spoken young man, very articulate, and he knows the game. I could definitely see Fox or Showtime giving him some type of analyst job for PBC if he can never fight again.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And look, I'm always in favor of fighters taking that type of role, because there was a lot of intelligent fighters. I remember right before Keith Thurman fought Danny Garcia, my mistake. And I remember sitting down with him for 20 minutes. And
Keith Thurman has all the potential to be an excellent color commentator. You're right.
Yeah, he was. that it was a phenomenal 20 minutes. He knows so much about the sport, so articulate. There's a lot of fighters that can definitely transition into that role well. Hell, Sean Porter has been doing extremely well in that role, doing stuff with Fox and with Ring City USA. He's done a tremendous job.
And he's going to be working with Lampley, right?
You went with Triller?
Yeah. Is it in Lampley and Porter?
I have not heard Porter's name. I know Lampley. I know Jim Lampley. Whatever that Teofimo George Kambosos fight gets made, whenever it gets made, I have no idea. But I know Lampley, but I haven't heard Sean Porter. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I overmissed something. But
I thought you were the one that told me Sean Porter. Oh, maybe I don't know. All right.
Maybe I was mistaken. But anyway, so one thing that I was thinking about is Fox has really been hit with the black cats.
Let me tell you something. Months. Boxing this summer has been hit with a black hat. It's been a horrible summer of boxing.
It's what should have been a fantastic, and let's be honest, it hasn't been all bad. We had some good moments, but even the best moments that we thought we were gonna have, they have a massive asterisk.
Yep.
Right next to it. Daniel Charlie. Yep. I mean, look, and I hope we get a rematch, but part of me kind of thinks it's looking less and less likely that it does get made because of mandatories. And, with Spence and Ugas and Pacquiao, boy, that has to be... That is a major blow to boxing because this was supposed to be... I mean, let's be honest. As much as we all admire Manny Pacquiao, but this was supposed to be that crowning moment for Errol Spence to be a major, major superstar in the United States, and he was already a star. He was already a star without a doubt. But
he was going to get
that torch was going to get passed.
He was going to get that rub that Oscar gave Floyd, that Oscar gave Manny. Right? He's not going to get it, and he may never fight again. Manny beats Ugas, and then hopefully Crawford fights Porter. Then maybe we got Crawford versus Manny because we ain't getting Crawford versus Spence. No.
I mean, there is something that we can still hope for in the sense that, those fights that you mentioned, if Crawford and Spence get made, that's a really good welterweight fight. Yordenis Ugas versus Manny Pacquiao, I think that's still a good welterweight fight. I would love for both of those guys, for the winners of both of those fights, to fight each other. If Porter wins, then, obviously it's going to make it all that much easier for him to fight the Pacquiao Ugas.
But Crawford's a free agent after this last fight.
That's true. But here's the thing.
And Crawford wants Manny.
Yeah, but we don't, but we have no idea if Crawford signs with PBC. It's not a guarantee. Also, I mean, there's no guarantee to what happens to Crawford's promotional future after the Spence fight. That's the thing.
And also, there's no guarantee Manny will fight, win or lose after the 21st.
Yeah, so a lot of different variables to sort of take into account here. But I think the biggest thing of all of this is whatever the welterweight future has in store, we can't put Errol Spence in it.
No.
I'm not saying that this is it for Errol Spence, but
you can't count on him in the picture. And in my opinion, if he does come back, it won't be at 147.
Could be at 154, could be. Listen, it's not, Spence going to 154 is not exactly something that's been thrown out of left field. I mean, it's been something that Spence has kind of teased a little bit, albeit not in a very serious way. But Spence at 154, it's not the first time that has been mentioned in the past.
And he's 5'10", which has been the regular height for a great junior middleweight. Terry Norris was 5'10". Mike McCollum was 5'10".
So
two of the greatest junior middleweights of all time. So he's got the size. He's got the if his eye is 100%, he's got the size to be a junior middleweight. Because Carlos, he's been a welterweight his entire career. That doesn't happen.
No, that's very rare for fighters to really make their mark at 147 and stay there for the rest of their career.
Look at all the great welterweights in the history of the sport. They've all moved up, every one of them, and him coming back off of injury, best case scenario, I believe he goes to 154, and we'll see from there.
Yeah, I agree. And again, last word on this. It's a really, really, big shame that Spence suffered this injury. Obviously, the biggest thing is that Spence, gets a full recovery and, is sound of mind. He appears to be safe. In a good place. If we were to go by his Twitter, I mean,
hey,
granted,
look,
you survive a car crash
money.
of that magnitude. Everything else you've seen kind of seems minimal.
He's playing with house money because he should be dead or in a coma. So he.
I mean, and listen, if this is it for Spence, and I don't think it is, because I do think that he'll come back, but I don't think we're going to see him for a very, very long time.
Yeah,
but.
And for him to come back, they would give him the same battery of tests that they gave Sugar Ray Leonard back in 1984 when he made his first comeback against Kevin Howard. They put his eye through all types of tests, and 40 years later, they've got even better testing. So Errol would have to be 100% with the eyesight for him to fight again. And I'd like to know, Carlos, how this was avoided when he refresh my memory. Was his fight against Danny in Texas or Nevada?
Texas.
Okay. All right. That explains why he got away with a bad eye in that fight. Okay.
Yeah, the Texas Commission is not
there
exactly...
you go. There you just answered why. Yeah, he had this injury all along. God, Lord.
It's not... Well, yeah, I'm not saying that it's... I'm not reporting that it's...
No,
that it's definitely a thing, but it's not...
This is my gut feeling. And we know the Texas Commission, because this fight going... He was going to fight Manny in Nevada, right?
Yes.
All right, there you go.
Yeah. Texas Commission is not exactly the paragon.
I would just leave it out there and let the fans decide for themselves whether or not he fought with this injury against Danny Garcia. Because I don't see it can't be a coincidence that they have the fight in Nevada and they have stringent medical tests and exams, and it comes out that he has a torn retina. And they didn't see that in Texas. Texas Commission is lackadaisical. All right.
Yeah, and this
good
wasn't
luck
like
to Errol Spence.
And this wasn't like Spence was sparring. He got a really bad hit. He went to a doctor, and that's when they discovered. No, it was a pre-fight medical examination by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. So listen. Trust me, I was an athlete at one point. There are times where we feel either 100% or we think that there's something that's a little bit off, but it's not really bothering me a whole lot. I'm sure it's nothing. And then you get tested and you find out it's something pretty big. It's not the first time an athlete just kind of not really notices there's something really bad with them. And then they all of a sudden, their athletic career is put on hold for the moment. Not the first time it's happened.